Thank you all for joining us this evening for this webinar as we honor PCOS Awareness Month, featuring those who have been diagnosed with PCOS and PCOS advocates. Birth in Color is a reproductive justice organization that focuses on maternal health, policy initiatives. We have a large doula collective, and we also have a large fatherhood initiative. All things reproductive justice is what we like to design our framework off of. And I would like to welcome all of the panelists. Thank you so much for joining us. A couple of housekeeping rules. Please put all questions in the chat and we will get back to them at the end of the conversation. And I will pass it over to our program director at Birth in Color, Brianna Riddick.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Again, my name is Brianna Riddick, and I'm the program director with Birth in Color. I'm also a doula within the collective and have been practicing for a little while. So I'm super excited to be here tonight to talk about PCOS and hopefully offer some really important information to those who are navigating life with PCOS or who might just be wanting some more information about what PCOS is and how to cope. So we have some amazing panelists here today, and I will let each of them introduce themselves, starting with Miss Unique Davis, and then we'll go from there and pass it down to panelists.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Unique Davis, as we mentioned. I am a director of catering at Eaton BC, so my background is in food and beverage, but I have been diagnosed with PCOS about 3 years ago, after struggling with infertility for about 3 or 4 years after starting the IVF process. I was actually diagnosed with PCOS. And now after IVF and 2 miscarriages, I'm pregnant with my rainbow baby due in November. And I am a birth in color mama and baby. So I'm excited to be here and share with you guys.
Thank you so much. Yes, we are so excited for baby Davis. Yes, girl. I will pass it to Miss Sasha Adi next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sasha Ati. I am founder and executive director of PCOS Challenge, the National Polycystic Ovary Syndrome Association, which I founded after my own diagnosis and dismissal and great dissatisfaction with how I was treated in the healthcare by my healthcare providers, and then found out that there were millions of others who were dealing with PCOS and felt the same way, felt dismissed, felt without options. And so I founded an organization to combat that, to combat the lack of education and information, and build an advocacy platform specifically for people with PCOS. I'm also, I also have my own maternal health journey. I have a beautiful girl who's going to be 2 years old in a few days. And, but my journey to getting pregnant, my journey to having a healthy baby was not without complication, in part caused by PCOS, and then in part caused by medically induced trauma. So we can get into that a little bit later, but it's real. The statistics are real. I've lived them as an advocate, as a knowledgeable person, and about the condition and about the risks, and no one is immune to the trauma that can be caused by not being respected as a human being, right? So glad to be a part of this conversation.
We are thankful. Thank you so much for sharing the work that you do and also your personal experiences too. And yes, we absolutely will be talking about some medical trauma in a little bit and bringing those things back up. So thank you for introducing yourself and sharing that. Dr. Hopkins.
Hi, good evening. Yes, my name is Dr. Kim Hopkins. I am a women's health nurse practitioner. I am a scientist with a focus in PCOS, and I also am a woman with PCOS. So I like to call myself a triple threader. I have a passion and love for PCOS, and my story is really ironic. After becoming a women's health nurse practitioner and working with military women, I had a lot of visits for irregular cycles and just complaint of fatigue and trying to lose weight. And as a new provider, I did what I was taught. Let's look at the symptoms. Let's treat the menstrual cycles with birth control. Let's talk about losing weight, and try to, be health conscious, whatever that meant, right? Well, after a while, I got tired of putting a Band-Aid on it, and I really was wondering, what is this mechanism behind this irregular cycle that I'm seeing all of these women with, and the military is transitory. So I thought maybe it's this place, but no, these women are coming and going. And so I went to look for answers, and I saw these 4 words: polycystic ovary syndrome. And as a women's health practitioner, I was like, well, what is this? Right? Mind blowing. And did more searching in the literature to find out insulin resistance is the main cause of, the irregular cycles. And it's not just irregular cycles, it's what the insulin resistance can do to the whole body system. It's a metabolic issue, it's a cardiovascular issue, it's a reproductive issue. So I found my passion to really try to help these women because no one was really understanding their plight. And the irony, after I became known as the provider who sat on the ball and diagnosed PCOS, every woman that I saw, either I was diagnosing PCOS or I was managing PCOS. Out of 14 patients a day, at least 8 were PCOS related. And so myself, I've always had irregular cycles, blew it off, no big deal. My pattern was, okay, just have, pads here, have tampons there, not a problem. So was hairy, hirsute, androgens, right? My family is. No worries, just keep tweezers everywhere. Thin, so, but I gained weight in the abdomen. And I thought I was walking down the hall one day after, again, 6 months of treating women with PCOS and being so passionate. I go, oh my gosh, I have PCOS. I'm a provider, providing all these care for these women, but not even noticing it in myself. So I can laugh at it now, but I am excited to be an advocate, especially for maternal health, because we, get told, come back when you want to get pregnant, but it's so important to start before then. You're already high risk, and to know that you're high risk when you do become pregnant. So, and not for it to be scary, but for, us to get educated so that we can advocate for ourselves and other women. So it is just my goal to be there as I can, as much as possible, to spread awareness. And thanks to PCOS Challenge and Sasha, I found her when I found that PCOS, what is this? And I found this organization, and I've been with them ever since. And I'm just very proud of what she is doing and what we all are doing. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here, and again for sharing everything that you've been through. Sometimes we have all the answers for other people and it doesn't register for ourselves. So I can relate to that in that moment of, oh my gosh, I have to also advocate for myself and figure out what's going on here. So we also want to hear more about your story in a little bit too. So Dr. Dafidere Atusanya, I'm sure you'll have to correct me on some of that pronunciation.
Good evening, everyone. It's Dafarede.
Dafarede.
Yes.
Thank you for getting me together. Yes, get me together. Thank you.
No. It's not an easy name to pronounce.
But it's important to learn how to. So thank you for that.
I appreciate you. So you can call me Ayo. I was diagnosed with PCOS, like almost everybody here. Between 2017 and 2018, like most people, it was a regular period. And prior to that, all my life, I've always experienced painful periods, which there was nothing that I was able to do that was able to kind of like bring it down. It has been so like paralyzing that sometimes I'll call out of school, call out of work. So I already knew starting from teenage age that something was off, right? But when I moved here and got married, and we're like, okay, let's try. Nothing was happening. Then I'll miss my period and I will think, oh, it's pregnancy. I'll be excited, and it's nothing. So I got with an OBGYN and they said, oh, it's PCOS. And I'm like, what? I never heard the term before then. So I was like, what is PCOS? And then it was such like a few minutes of conversation. You have PCOS. So I'll put your metformin. I'm like, but I don't even know what PCOS is, right? So after that, thankfully, I was doing my PhD at the time. So my research literature, I just went into my books and I'm like, okay, what is PCOS? Then I started seeing so many information that my doctor did not share with me. And I was like, okay, since I'm doing my PhD, let's just direct the conversation to understanding this condition. Not only will it be beneficial to me, but hopefully more people can read. And that's how I got into my dissertation on PCOS. And I also joined PCOS awareness. I was part of the medical and research team where we kind of like pulled together directory for healthcare providers who actually attend to specifically people with PCOS. I was there for a little bit. Life happened. I'm now full-time employed as a health and intercultural communication lecturer. So it's been hard shuttling both. So currently, I'm just like speaking about PCOS in my classrooms. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you also for being here and also sharing about your dissertation and your research and how you found that information. I wish we could make every provider just give us the information that we need. But again, these kinds of conversations are where we share information and resources for people who, again, may also have never heard of it and are looking for places to go. So thank you so much for sharing all of that. Ms. Momplace here, would you want to go next?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Aliana Montplaisir, and I am the program director at the Resilient Sisterhood Project, RSP for short. RSP is a Boston-based nonprofit organization founded in 2012 with the mission to educate and empower women of African descent about their reproductive health and rights. So we look at things through a cultural and social justice lens. We talk about different reproductive health conditions, including PCOS. We also talk about intersections, environmental justice, food justice, maternal health, birthing justice. And I like to say that I am still on the road of my PCOS journey. I know we'll be getting to diagnosis disparities and such during our conversation, but it's been somewhat of a long journey for me. A lot of painful periods since I was like 12 years old. Parasitism since 16. So it's definitely been a long journey. A lot of advocacy between myself and my mom growing up. So whenever that diagnosis comes, whatever it may be.
Thank you so much for sharing, and thank you for being here too. I think that is everybody who is going to be a panelist. Is there anybody who I may have missed? All right, so I think that's everybody. Let's go ahead and jump right into questions. So first of all, we have just talked so much about how sometimes people don't even know what PCOS is or where to start with like looking for information. So first, can we just start by explaining what polycystic ovary syndrome is, how it affects individuals, and then maybe some common symptoms? I heard many of us talking about painful periods and having to navigate life with painful periods, maybe calling out of school and work and things like that. So how might those symptoms look, and what even is PCOS, I think is a good place for us to start.
And it's such a complex condition that I try to make it as simple as possible, but not minimize the impact of PCOS, right? So it really is a condition of hormonal imbalance and dysregulation, and specifically it's androgen excess and ovarian dysfunction. And commonly what is associated with PCOS is insulin resistance, and that's really at the crux of a lot of the cardiovascular, metabolic, and reproductive issues, right? So we talk about the symptoms. So PCOS is characterized by irregular menstrual cycles, which is an indication of anovulation. It's also characterized by, again, the excessive androgens, which are male hormones. And you see that as either excessive facial or body hair, or either male pattern balding on the head. You can also have excess, your sebaceous glands or your oil glands are hyperactive, so you may have oily skin or cystic acne. Those are some of their symptoms that come from the androgen excess. And then there's also the ultrasound, which may show that you have polycystic ovaries. And so those three symptoms are really what we use to diagnose. There are, 3 different organizations that have put forth what diagnostic criteria, but we do know now that Rotterdam is what is recommended to use. And so the 3 criteria are presence of anovulation, the polycystic ovaries on ultrasound, and the hirsutism. And you only need to have 2 of the 3. And so I like to say, once you know those 3 criteria, this index of suspicion as a clinician and just as a person in general should really be heightened. Although insulin resistance isn't a part of the diagnostic criteria, it is so common that if you just, I tell people this, if you just kind of take a look around, and some indications of hyperinsulinemia or insulin resistance is, acanthus nigricans, which is the darkening of, the skin. You may see a darker neck and the armpits or the groin area. The skin is darkened. That's the insulin coming through the tissue. Now, in Asian Americans, you may see skin tag. That's also high levels of insulin. So if you just look around and you notice, and then the abdominal area is, also has more weight there because insulin loves to go to those fat cells and increase the size. And so you may not have full body overweightness or obesity, but it may be centralized into the abdomen. So those are just some things to consider with PCOS. I hope I answered the question and didn't get too deep off the train.
Yeah. And Dr. Hopkins, I'll also add that it's a diagnosis of exclusion. So there are some conditions that can give you the hirsutism or that may have similar features of PCOS, and doctors need to rule those out, right? Through blood tests, et cetera. And there are other issues that some may experience, namely mental health disorders, high rates of anxiety, depression, bipolar, eating disorders associated with PCOS. And so it's a very isolating condition if you don't understand what's going on, right? And if you don't feel empowered as a patient, then it's truly an isolating condition. It's embarrassing on many levels for some people, right? Because of what societal norms dictate what women should look like, right? I've been at, and then also biases in the medical hemisphere, right? By medical providers. So I'll give you a quick example. Not all women with PCOS will experience weight gain or be overweight or live in bigger bodies. It's a really heterogeneous condition. You can line up 10 people and they all look different. They have a different combination of the symptoms. It's a syndrome. So it's various constellations of, it's a constellation of symptoms that can affect you differently. And I remember us going to an OBGYN conference, right? These are gynecologists who should know all about PCOS. And we had our banner up, and this doctor came up and he said, that doesn't look like PCOS, because there were some lean women there were on the banner. He's like, women with PCOS are fat and hairy. I said, okay, doc. That was an opportunity for me to educate him. And then, yes, not everyone has insulin resistance, but PCOS is the most common cause of hirsutism in women, right? So as you were speaking earlier, Dr. Montplaisir, you started exhibiting hirsutism at 16. That was, you had irregular periods, and those were the two things to to set off alarm bells for your doctor, right? But there's a culture of, especially when you're younger, dismissing you. This is a part of puberty, which, yes, puberty is wonky in the first couple years, right? But you also had another classic sign of PCOS, which was the hirsutism. So they should have monitored you for a couple of years at least, and then given you a diagnosis after ruling out other conditions. So yeah, there's a lot of gaslighting. But I think one of the reasons for that, though, outside of it being a women's health condition mostly, is and also disproportionately impacting women of color. It's also, there hasn't historically been a lot of tools in the toolbox. So unless you're seeking pregnancy, unless reproduction is what you want to happen right now, there was very little that could be done, or not that could be done, that doctors understood about what to be done, right? So there's huge gap in awareness and knowledge, and there's hope, because we see things getting better the more and more we work to advocate and raise the profile of PCOS.
We started to talk a little bit about this, and following that explanation, I want to get a little bit deeper into it. But can we talk a little bit about disparities in diagnosis or treatment, specifically for Black women? What does diagnosis typically look like, or even misdiagnosis, as you were saying? Some people can be dismissed or not taken seriously by providers when having this conversation.
I'll start off by saying 50 to 70% of PCOS patients are going undiagnosed. And more Black women are going undiagnosed. So it's one, having access to providers who understand the condition. But it's so much more than that. I'm sure we'll get deeper into the conversation, but Black women are less likely to get a diagnosis, even presenting with the classic signs and symptoms. Hispanic women, or those who may have who may speak another language other than English, they're less likely to get a diagnosis. And so it's, there are many things that's happening in medicine that and biases and stigma that cause a lot of these misdiagnoses. But there isn't, the only real, besides medical racism, is the only thing is that PCOS just hadn't been a priority, right? It's the classic signs are, and then even if you have the classic signs are, it's such a simple diagnosis. Dr. Hopkins mentioned it's, if you have irregular cycles, if you have signs of high male hormones or androgens, such as the acne. These are things that can identify. You can easily spot some of these things. But even if you don't have the hirsutism or the acne, there are blood tests that can rule this out. So it's the onus shouldn't always be on the patient, but being an empowered patient, being knowledgeable about, oh, well, this doesn't feel right, and advocating for yourself and continuing to advocate for yourself and changing providers are some of the things that we recommend when you know that there's something wrong, and keep getting the answer that it's all in your head.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in on what Sasha spoke about as far as the issues of diagnoses in the Black community. There is the weight bias, right? So you have us come in and maybe overweight or obese, and the bias and a racial piece to that too is, oh, you're just lazy, you're not working hard enough, or you're just eating the wrong things. And so let's talk about, weight, and let's talk about nutrition and fitness, and stop right there, and not even, well, let's see, how are your cycles when because of this weight, or, what are you eating? Delving a little deeper. So that's one of the biggest things, is that visual bias. And I will say, as a provider, I take full responsibility. I was not aware of PCOS, so I became aware because I saw so many women who had so many similar conditions. And any provider at every visit should always ask about menstrual history until menopause. And even women in menopause who were not diagnosed, I've had to hold my tongue so many times, that Sasha hit it on the head. It's not that difficult to, once you have that suspicion, clinical suspicion, or that awareness of PCOS. We know there are three symptoms that you can look for when you do the history. What's your menstrual cycle like? Oh, I mean, it's always been irregular. Oh, well, let's delve into that. That's one. Visualization. Oh, you have a little mustache, a little, you have hair on your chin, you have excess maybe in the groin area, or maybe even moles. That's androgens. Visually, you can do clinical observation of androgens, or you can also do blood work, like Sasha said. But those are two right there. You're already diagnosed. The last step really is to get that ultrasound, because you should be able to really, again, that clinical suspicion of, number one, what is your menstrual cycle? That is a sixth vital sign. Did I already say that? That's what I see it as. So, yes, I will let someone else speak at this time.
Yes. And just to quickly add to this, just the impact that misdiagnosis, the time it takes to receive diagnosis, the time it takes for treatment. When we look at research to, formulate our resources around PCOS, it's always higher, higher, increased risk, higher rates of parasitism, insulin resistance, obesity, higher risk for cardiovascular disease, metabolic syndromes, blood pressure, like the list goes on and on and on. So these biases, these misdiagnoses, the lack of care, in some spaces as well, it just has real life impact. And when some people find out their diagnosis, or if they have other related issues, it almost feels like, why did it take so long? Because now I just feel like things were able to get worse when we could have backtracked and, taking care of things a little faster.
That's a great point. Again, that's another, there are little clues everywhere, right? So, for example, I had an older woman in her 40s. And this day I had so many women with PCOS. I thought, maybe it's me. Maybe I am not going to diagnose anyone. I am not going to look for anything. I'm just going to care for these women for what they come in for. And she came in because she had headaches. She was overweight. So she could be overweight. That doesn't mean anything. Her blood pressure was elevated. Okay, she could have elevated blood pressure because, she's overweight. Her skin was oily. Okay, she could just be sweaty today. I'm not diagnosing this woman. Finally, time to do her assessment. the groin area, just acanthus nigricans, just dark. And I thought, okay. So even trying not to, when you understand what to look for, right? And so then, checking to see, what that prolactin level is. Maybe that's why your cycles are irregular, or looking at your thyroid level. Maybe that's why your weight is this way, or, again, ruling out. So just getting that awareness out again to women and to providers,
And this is really important for Black women in particular. If you don't have your periods at least every 3 months, that puts you at higher risk for endometrial cancer. PCOS causes anovulation, which presents in most people as lack of periods. So some people will go over a year or so without having their periods. And they have been told, like myself, my doctor told me not to worry about not having my periods because plenty of women would look not having their periods. That's erroneous. Not having your periods can put you at higher risk for endometrial cancer. Black women in particular are at higher risk of getting a diagnosis when it's too late. PCOS puts you at higher risk for endometrial cancer in younger years. They're not usually looking for endometrial cancer in 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds. But this is the case for PCOS if you haven't been having your periods regularly, if you don't shed that lining frequently, right? Either or using birth control, I guess, to kind of protect that lining. So women with PCOS, Black women with PCOS are more susceptible to endometrial cancer at younger ages, more susceptible to misdiagnosis of endometrial cancer until it's too late they're more resistant to the available medications. So we're more likely to get a hysterectomy at a younger age because nobody's looking for it, because they don't understand this being a higher risk because of having this condition, and also because of your racial background. So there's as you were speaking earlier about the life impact of not having the diagnosis, not understanding. That's one of the things that can, it's having a hysterectomy has consequences, and one of which means that if you want to have a biological child, and having PCOS is the most common cause of anovulatory infertility, but women with PCOS have the same number of children. It may take you longer, but if you have a hysterectomy, that option is taken away from you. And this happens more often in Black and brown women.
So I'm hearing a couple of things as we talk about this. I think it's really important that we go back to this idea that the onus is not just on us as patients or people navigating the healthcare system, but I'm hearing the importance of providers also looking for signs and suggesting and offering information when you know the signs of PCOS or you have more information about it that might be helpful for a patient to know about. So what would you suggest for people who are trying to increase their level of awareness, or what's helpful for talking with providers about things that they need to look for, things we need to pay attention for, and not just putting the onus on the patient?
Probably asking a lot of questions by getting noticing everything going on with your body, no matter how small it is. So whenever you notice skin tags, write it down, talk to your doctor about it. When you're going into maybe doctor's appointments, make sure that you have a written list of questions to ask them. And when they're not giving you the correct or the detailed explanation, you can say, is there additional resources that you can recommend? So they can send you to appropriate quarters to get more information. And also sometimes when your doctor is not responding the way you think you should be responded to, we have that power to actually change our healthcare providers. So while the onus is on the doctor sometimes to be helpful, which is not always the case, we can always change our healthcare providers to people who are much more receptive to listening to our concerns.
I
Yes.
agree in that.
Sorry, I felt like I was getting ready to cut somebody off, so feel free to jump in before I ask another question. But again, that's another thing that I'm hearing, this idea of being an empowered patient as we interact with providers and not being afraid to advocate for ourselves. And also understanding that it is worth the fight if you have to change a provider or if you have to keep asking questions or going back again and again and again to make sure that you are getting the care and the diagnosis that ultimately we deserve at the end of the day. So I want to welcome more of the personal stories of navigating life with PCOS, and we talked some about the impact of having a late diagnosis or still trying to seek a diagnosis. So let's talk a little bit about personal stories of living life with PCOS. What is that like, and what things kind of keep you motivated, and challenges that you face interacting with providers and just navigating life in general?
Well, I don't mind jumping in and sharing there. Um, so as I mentioned, my husband and I tried for a little over, I want to say 5 years, to try and get pregnant. And I want to say, we didn't start until our first year into marriage. And before that, I had heavy periods, missed periods, just really bad menstrual cramps. Um, and it was chalked up to, overweight or just hormones of being teenagers, and because we got married pretty young. And so that first year after marriage, when you're super excited to say like, okay, we're gonna start our family now. Um, Infertility is diagnosed after like 1 full year of trying to conceive and not happening. So, um, at 22, 23, you think, oh, it's so easy to get pregnant. And, that's a more of a bigger fear of like getting pregnant. So that after that first year of trying, and I looked up and I'm telling my doctor, well, it didn't happen. Like, what's next? And all throughout that time telling them, okay, I'm having missed periods or really heavy periods, and that diagnosis just not being there. So then, always being told, okay, well, maybe you should lose weight. That was always my feedback, to work on my weight. So I was put on different medicines like the metformin, and weight loss supplements for during the second year of trying to conceive. And at that time, I was with Kaiser. So if you're familiar with Kaiser, it's like whichever doctor is in the office is who you see. So I had several different providers throughout that time. And then as we entered the third year, we're entering the pandemic, and I'm telling my husband, all right, enough is enough. Like, we need to seek help, like, um, for this. And throughout that time, as you can imagine, it's dealing with hormones, dealing with depression, feeling like, am I a woman enough? Why can't I do this one simple thing? Everyone around me is getting pregnant and starting their families. And I'm like, I'm the checklist girl. I went to college, got married. I want to start the family, got the career. Like, why isn't my checklist being marked off? So we decided to try and go to IVF. And in the first appointment consultation, the doctor said, maybe you should lose 100 pounds and then come back and talk to us. And I remember being just devastated. I was like, well, like, I guess no one wants to help us. Like, the doctors won't help us, the IVF clinic, like, we're just not going to have to figure it out. And then we went into our fourth year of trying, and we found a fertility clinic um, in upstate New York, and we lived in Virginia at the time. So we had to travel 6.5 hours to this IVF clinic just to be serviced because I was overweight. And they sent me to Annandale OBGYN. And the very first appointment, the doctor gives me an ultrasound and says, you know, you have PCOS, right? And I was like, I've never heard of PCOS, so no, I don't know I have that. But very first appointment, but 4 years into trying to get pregnant, which was devastating because I was like, had I had this information, I'm a planner, I'm a doer, I would have taken all the necessary steps to try and mitigate some of the decisions and like my progress along the way. And so after getting that diagnosis, we were able to make strides in like moving forward in our journey. And IVF did not work for us. Like we went through 3 rounds of IVF. My hormones could not get balanced when they tried different medicines. That did not work for us, but I was able to take control, advocate for myself, do more research, join different PCOS communities online. Um, I'll pick up a book real quick and read it. So, just being able to allow myself to be my own advocate moving forward really helped and was a game changer. And so, living with PCOS, I have to say, was really difficult in the beginning because I was just like, wow, this is something I'm uncomfortable with. I've never heard of it. My mom was like, I don't know what PCOS is. My sisters, like my aunties, none of them were diagnosed with PCOS, so they weren't able to relate. And I don't think a lot of my girlfriends at the time were also very familiar with PCOS. So it was just isolating while also being an isolating experience of like trying to start a family. And there's a little bit of embarrassment along the way where you don't really want to share your journey or share the story because you just don't really have the answers. But I found empowerment in reclaiming my time, and like I started a YouTube channel, started going on TikTok and sharing my story, and I found that a lot of other women resonated with my story and were able to give me great feedback and like great resources to go back and ask for the right questions to advocate for myself. And fifth year where we stopped trying, lost the weight, and just I had 2 missed periods and I assumed it was because of PCOS, but turns out I was 10 weeks pregnant. So things turned around on their own. But I think a lot of it had to do with being able to reclaim my joy and just live life um, outside of that. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that story. And the move from, again, like you said, the embarrassment or feeling shame of not wanting to share to feeling empowered to share is such a huge deal. So I hope you celebrate yourself and feel proud. And it is inspirational to hear other people's stories and to be able to relate in that way. So continue to share, and thank you for sharing here with us today. And that last piece that you said about maintaining joy, you said, once I was able to like reclaim my time, I got my joy back. And I really feel like that's what happens. Facing challenges of PCOS can be super duper overwhelming, as we have talked about. So what other practices or strategies do you all suggest for maintaining joy or a positive outlook for those who are navigating life with PCOS?
It's really important to be kind to yourself because I come from a little different background. I did see women who were attempting, conception, which I would right away send to a reproductive endocrinologist that was aware of PCOS. But outside of conception, you have to be careful to speak about being kind to yourself. And it's not about weight, it's about a lifestyle, because you can really get caught up in, and that is why I believe health, disordered eating and eating disorders are so highly associated with PCOS, because society, social media, are telling you how you should be, how you should look. And we know that the weight portion with the insulin resistance is quite significant. So it really can steer your life. Don't eat this, don't eat that. I need to work out here, I need to do that. And so everything that you're doing is really can be inside of PCOS, because everything can impact it. So I try very hard when I have my ladies is, hey, welcome in. We're going to have a really long relationship and you're going to see me a lot, because if you're able with insurance, it is really important to see your provider at least twice a year, just to check in and to see how things are going, if interventions are working or not, and just what is best for you, but to not focus on the weight, but the lifestyle and things that you can incorporate into your life. Like, maybe you don't have to go to the gym. You can park your car further away when you're going places, and you can use stairs instead of elevators. And, while you're watching TV, if there are commercials, I don't know if that's a thing anymore. I don't really watch TV, but, do some crunches or push-ups while you're, just incorporate things that are easier to do and not so onersome or so inconvenient, so that you have that, I don't want to say excuse, but that out for not being able to set aside a time, because we all know we're busy and doing lots of different things. So just being kind to yourself and finding that joy, because, stress, as we know, releases cortisol, which PCOS already increases those levels. And so it's difficult to lose weight when your hormones are already all over the place, and then you're adding more with no sleep. We spoke about that earlier, trying to find some rest time and some sleep time. You're not going to get that weight down if you don't get that sleep that you need. Some of us think, oh, we can make it on 4 to 5 hours. Well, you can try, but in the end, it's going to impact the process of your condition. So be kind.
For myself, I think it was a reclaiming process when it comes to the hirsutism. It's pretty bad for me. I have a lot of hyperpigmentation around my chin and my neck. So there was one point it got worse, I think, before it got better. And I had my mom check in a couple of times, but I think within like the last 4 or 5 years, I think I've started to reclaim like skincare for myself and just taking care of myself, going through like a skincare routine, washing my face, not like spending time looking in the mirror and being like, oh, I need a pair of tweezers. Oh, I need to like set an appointment for waxing, sugaring, laser, like whatever other methods are out there. So I think that has been really helpful for me. Sometimes I just let it be as it is and take care of it when I feel like taking care of it, instead of feeling like I have to do this almost every week, almost every day.
If you think of a person, especially if you have hirsutism and weight issues, and weight isn't an issue for everyone, right? Some people, genetically, you're just built a certain way. You don't fit into the BMI scale that was based way back in the day on white men, right? So, but when you go to your doctor, the first thing they tell you, and I'm sure all of us have, maybe except Kim, have been told, lose weight, or maybe you have, even as lean people have been told, lose weight. That's the first thing. Without being provided with any real tools, right? Any personalized care, just the cookie cutter approach. Lose weight, eat less, exercise more. It's causing so much disordered eating, so much obsession and additional anxiety and stress when you're already living in a body that is highly stressed, that's highly anxious because of, one, your hormones, and two, the things that you're experiencing, right? You have facial hair, especially as a young person, and having to go to school, and actually there are high rates of homeschooling in PCOS young adults, or young and teenagers and adolescents, because of the bullying that they experience because of having facial hair, weight issues, even while being athletic, right? So it's not just about what you're eating. It's not just about not having exercise, because I'm telling you, once you do get that PCOS diagnosis and you're trying to figure it out yourself, you're doing all the things. And sometimes that's the problem. You're doing all the things at the same time. You don't know what's actually working. You don't know what's working for you. You're just trying something that somebody else says worked for them. And intermittent fasting is not for everyone. Keto is not for everyone. all those diets is not for everyone. And I really like that that you incorporated joy, or that you mentioned in incorporating joy, because at a certain point it becomes too much, and you realize that, wait, I am not enjoying life. Everything is take away this, take away that, don't eat this, don't eat that. And so how am I gonna socialize with my friends and family? When I go see my grandmother, the first thing she wants to do is give me some food, or, so how are we going to enjoy life in a culturally appropriate way when we're taking away everything that brings us joy? One of the things that we should all do today, and realize that mental health is one of the foundational things that we should address in order to be able to adhere to anything that our doctors, our healthcare providers tells us, is what can I add? Not what can I take away? What can I add? Can I add some yoga? Can I, is there some food? You can have your ice cream once a week or whatever. Like, don't take away the things that make you happy, that bring you joy, that enable you to socialize and be a happy, healthy, living human being. Just remember that you are not PCOS. PCOS is a part of your life. And most of us are also dealing with multiple conditions at the same time. So what do you do then? The only thing that we can do is figure out what works for us, take some of the stress off that other people are putting on you, right? Because it's not just your doctors, it's also your family members saying you're a little fat or whatever, right? I'm Jamaican, so I've heard all the things. Or if you've lost weight, why you lose so much weight? Well, you look sick, so you can't live your life trying to please everybody else. Try to incorporate what pleases you, what brings joy, and that will bring down your stress levels. That will help you reclaim your time. That will help you live the life that you want to live, even while having PCOS. PCOS does not have to define you or your everyday life.
Yes, I love all of that so much. It is so important for us to still lead joyful lives. Things are going to be hard, but we've got to find those pockets of joy where we can. And I'm so glad you started to talk about family and cultural influences and the role that our networks play in making things either a little bit easier or a little bit harder for us. So what role do you all think that community support and peer networks make or play in managing PCOS? How do people find systems, create systems, and really have that wraparound kind of support that you need to be well with PCOS?
For me, coming from a Nigerian background, Nigerian community, greetings are done through commenting on your weight. Like, hey, hi, you've added some pounds. What's going on? Like, I experienced that because I was so slim, like for the first 2 decades of my life. And then moving to my 30s, the weight just got on, and everybody was like, what's wrong? So I had to kind of reimagine myself in a different size because I couldn't believe that I have added like 2 more sizes and it's going to be my size for a couple of years because I was dealing with PCOS. So having to have that conversation with people saying, asking me about my weight or commenting about my weight is not like helping right now because I have PCOS. It took me a while, starting from immediate family. Yeah, adding weight. I'm like, yeah, I know. I'm working on it, or oh, I actually have PCOS, which makes it difficult for me to lose weight. And first of all, I had to change my wardrobe. I had to accept that, okay, my weight has changed. And I think that kind of helped boost my confidence because for the longest time, I couldn't face people just because of my weight. So having people that you're comfortable telling your diagnosis to, because sometimes you have to tell people, especially people from the background of them commenting on your weight every single time, you might want to like, hey, I'm dealing with something. You might not understand it, but those comments are kind of hurtful. I had that conversation with one or two people. I had to. And I think, I don't know if it helped them, but it kind of helped me, kind of liberated me a little bit from having to go back and like cry or having to go back and then become depressed. So just being open, really, because not everybody have the knowledge about what PCOS is. And because of our cultural upbringing, it is okay to call you fat in some cultures. So we have to kind of start re-educating people that no, it's not really okay. Or what you just said really hurts me badly because this is what I'm facing. But you can't always tell people about your health because you don't want to make PCOS your identity. So it's a difficult conversation sometimes to have. Or sometimes I deliberately just wear free-flowing clothes so that people don't spot my midsection. I mean, just do what works for you to make you comfortable, is all I'll say. Do what works for you that will make you comfortable. And if you feel that something is really hurtful, and if you're comfortable sharing your diagnosis with someone, they don't have to understand it, but they have to know the impact of what they said to you at that moment, if that makes sense.
Yeah, they'll call you fat, but bring you a whole big plate of jollof rice, and right at the in the same breath. uh, so yes, sometimes and sometimes I really like the fact that you mentioned the acceptance of your size, and sometimes that's a journey in itself. To come to terms with what you look like, to come to terms with the fact that this isn't societal norm, and still find beauty in yourself, still accept, okay, well, my midsection might not be flat. I understand why it is. While I'm working on that, if you want to work on that, because some people like to be voluptuous, right? As long as you are doing the lifestyle things that Dr. Hopkins mentioned, I think that weight should not be the only measure of success. And in some cases, even in some PCOS centers, they're taking out the whole weight out of the conversation, right? So it's incorporating healthier practices. What are other measures? Blood pressure, that's really important, especially for Black women with PCOS. Hypertension is huge. And then connecting that to maternal health, having a high blood pressure or pregnancy-induced hypertension, which can lead to, things that can lead to preeclampsia and other maternal health issues. It's a really important thing, and that we should take seriously, right? Yes, we can still eat some of the things, but we should be intentional about how we eat, how we incorporate healthful practices into our lives, understanding that, yes, this is something to take seriously. The risks are high, especially if you're Black or brown. We are disproportionately impacted by the metabolic side of things. We are measured by the same standards as everyone else, but genetically we are not the same, but we don't have the research and the information in our populations to reflect that. So for example, triglycerides, we can start exhibiting or start having cardiac effects at lower triglyceride levels than what the doctors are looking for. So you don't have to reach 200 or whatever to have those effects, but nobody is looking for it in the lower range, right? So not everything that applies to other people applies to us. So we have to understand that. Genetically, we're just predisposed to certain things, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, maternal health risks, infertility, all the things we're not talking about because we don't talk about periods, we don't talk about, and we need to break that chain, right? We need to stop that, understand that we are disproportionately impacted because of so many things, because of how complex our societal structure is, because of socioeconomic status, because of all these things. And so we have to just do the best with what we want. Some of us don't live in walkable neighborhoods, right? Some of us can't park our car too far because it's not safe. But so just taking this, everything all the steps that we can do, like let's walk around inside of our homes when we feel safer, right? Get some steps while we're indoors. So however we can adjust these things to our life, the things we have access to, is how we become empowered patients, right? Understanding that this is something that we've been dealt. It impacts our reproductive health. Many of us also have fibroids. Many of us also have endometriosis, adenomyosis, other things that impact getting pregnant, other things that impact our pregnancies, and other things that impact us once we do have our babies. And this is a lifelong condition that impacts you beyond reproductive years. It's a genetic condition, but it's also lifelong. But we don't have the studies to show what happens in perimenopause and menopause. So, but what we do know is that as Black women, as women of color, we're at these increased metabolic risks. We're at increased mental health risks, but we don't talk about that. And we need to start.
Right, and there are even studies to show that even if you take a highly educated PhD, high socioeconomic status Black women to a white high school dropout, low socioeconomic white person who are pregnant, the mortality and morbidity of the Black person is much higher than the white. And so, is it genetics? Is it the implicit medical racism, the explicit racism? Is it the stressors that we have just as being people of color? No matter, you can't escape that socioeconomic or racial bias with your finances and with your knowledge. So again, there are so many studies that are needed. And also, as Sasha pointed out, PCOS is a lifelong condition from, well, we believe in utero into the grave, right? And so obviously we don't diagnose until adolescence and menarche, menstrual cycles have started. But once you hit that, you're no longer in reproductive range, which I now am. And then you have that menopause on top of that. So your hormones are already all over the place with PCOS. You are already now, looking at cardiovascular conditions, which we really need to know that at the onset of diagnosis of PCOS, the cardiovascular clock starts then. And so that's why it's so important. We talk about all of the hypertension and the cardiovascular conditions because we're not looking at that until in our maybe 30s or 40s, when actually that is started the moment that insulin starts to increase all of these other, hormones in the body and causes cardiovascular disruption. With your dyslipidemia, your lipids are, as Sasha spoke, we worry about, there's a new term for non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. I'm sorry, I don't remember what it is.
MASLD.
Yes.
MASLD, metabolic associated steatotic liver disease.
So we're looking at that sleep apnea, and that is also because we have higher testosterone levels, which is what, you see that men have higher rates of sleep apnea until women go into menopause, and we have higher, testosterone levels after menopause. And so that's when we catch up with sleep apnea. But women with PCOS are at the same rate of sleep apnea as men. So there are just so many comorbidities with this condition, and we really need awareness, first of all, that it even exists, because you can't educate if you don't know what to educate about, right? So that's why it's so important, these webinars and having different panels and different diverse populations just to continue to spread the word about PCOS. It's an opportunity when someone says, oh, you gain weight, and to speak about why you gain that weight. So now they hear that PCOS, and hopefully they're not out telling your business, but hey, you're talking to someone else and there's PCOS. And that's how we just move it forward, is we just constantly speak about it. And then after we start speaking, then we start acting, right? Advocate. If there is no support group for you or no place for you, make your own place. Find a space. There are so many of us, with PCOS. It affects 10 to 21% worldwide. That's 1 in 5 women. So let's see, there's 6 of us on here. We all have PCOS, but I'm sure someone, or someone that does not know they have PCOS. So
I want to echo that really briefly, what Dr. Hopkins was saying about just speaking and how important it is to just share your experience. I think one thing that we see, I want to say throughout, the Black community, whether you come from the Caribbean, whether you come from Africa, it's just like the culture of silence, especially when it comes to women's health, when it comes to reproductive health. Thinking of like religious, circles and things like that, and how misinformation, oh, we don't talk about that, keep that private. It's so important for us to talk. That's how you start to find your tribe. And like we were saying earlier, that's one way to lower your cortisol levels, just being able to talk and have that off of your back. Just especially just thinking about my own experience and just being able to talk with my friends. We're like, yeah, this isn't normal. That's not normal. We encourage each other to go OBGYN. Oh, first time pap smear, definitely go do this. But also within the women in my family and being able to speak with them more openly about different reproductive health experience that they have. We've all had to navigate those heavy periods, those painful periods, sharing techniques sometimes to deal with them, whether that be the tea, whether that be the heating pad. Do you need to change your clothes? Do you need this? Do you need someone to walk behind you? Things like that. But yeah, if we don't talk, that culture of silence, secrecy, just continues.
And I just want to add one more thing to that, because I think the power of community is so important. And if you can't find that community, like, go and create it. I'm a big proponent of opening my mouth, and like between the power of Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, social media is such a powerful tool. And there's so many people who are like out there to relate to our story. So like I said, I couldn't find community in my mom and my aunties. Often those were the people who were hurting me and making it sting a little bit more. But as soon as I started sharing it with strangers online, I did find my community, and it empowered me to be able to ask more questions or just be confident about what's happening to my body, and being able to stand up to my family and be like, some of these inappropriate comments, I'm not going for them like anymore. I don't care if you mama, grandma, cousin, auntie, like no more, because I know what's going on with my body, and there's so many other women going through it. And it's okay to share it. I think I shared this with Bree, that one of my friends recently, I shared that I was having a thinning cervix online, because I had never heard of a thinning cervix before. This is my first pregnancy. And she was like, well, maybe you should keep it to yourself until the baby comes. And I was so offended, because I was like, who are you to tell me to keep this story to myself because you're uncomfortable? Like and then there was 30 women in the comments saying, I had a full-term pregnancy. This is what I did. This is the questions you should be asking. And they gave me the confidence. They took away the anxiety. They made me feel like I had camaraderie in a community of women I didn't even know I needed at that moment. I think that was the importance of that teachable moment of like, okay, sharing my story, it was relatable, and I got to gain something from that experience too.
I love that. And that was your way of empowering yourself, and also really spreading awareness based on your personal experience. And I think lived experiences should be the driver for everything, should be what we center everything around, treatment options, and change, right? So it should be about patient priorities. But for those who have different personalities where they are really introverted or they don't feel empowered to speak, don't yet feel empowered to speak up, right? There are many people like that, and they have to go through the journey themselves and may never ever end up speaking publicly, right? But you can advocate in different ways, right? You can advocate for yourself with your doctors. You can join PCOS Challenge. We do actual legislative advocacy around PCOS, and hopefully we can all work together on that. But it's about, we built a platform for PCOS patients and all stakeholders to come together to advocate within the government, because I'll let you know something. The government on a whole didn't know that this was a problem to solve. And then if it's not if they don't know about the problem, then guess what? It continues to go ignored. It continues to not get funded for research, right? It continues to go under the radar. And what drives change is those of us who have gone through our journeys and we're now in the position where we can speak up, right? And we can share our stories, or we can hold somebody's hand while they're timidly sharing their stories, but they're pushing through and finding their voice. Until those others find their voice, we can be their voice, right? We can work together to change health policy. We need to connect the dots between PCOS and the things that we all care about: maternal health, mental health, metabolic health, obesity, all of the things that the government cares about. Yet if PCOS is not in the conversation, PCOS is not being addressed, there's no funding going to research. And I'll also tell you, we had to advocate for the National Institutes of Health, the largest funder of biomedical research in the world, to add PCOS on their list of diseases and conditions. That just happened in 2022, and that's based off our advocacy and us knocking on every single door in Congress. Kim, you've been there in DC, knocking on doors, meeting with legislators. We built a coalition or within Congress. We have a PCOS bipartisan caucus. And so we just continue to not shut up about it, right? So we have
I
to.
was going to bring that up, Sasha, about
Yeah.
how amazing PCOS Challenge has been as far as not backing down and being persistent, because I did my postdoc in the Office of Research on Women's Health at the National Institutes of Health. And when I came into that office, which looks at all of the research nationwide and even internationally, I looked at this list and I thought, what is this RCDC? And it is the Sasha,
Researches and conditions and diseases categorization. Yeah.
so this is the list of conditions that Congress is going to fund. If it's not on there, they're not funding. So of course I looked down this list and I'm like, where's PCOS? And this was just a question out loud because I thought maybe I need to look somewhere else. And someone in the office was like, oh, it's probably, it's so complicated. It's probably within something. And I thought, well, that makes no sense. I do understand that it does impact every system and age and health and, all those, but it is so important that it needs to have its own category. And PCOS Challenge with constant lobbying, well, let me use the word constant, going to Capitol Hill and speaking to, Congress members and senators, and it is now on the list. And I'm just amazed at that, just amazed, because that is a huge feat. So thank you for that, Sasha.
That is a huge deal, and it takes that persistent advocacy. And I'm so glad y'all brought that up because I was going to ask how legislators and policymakers can influence people's experiences of PCOS or what things you would like to see changed. And I think you all are speaking so much to something that's also important to us is this idea of advocacy, and also that our advocacy intersects, right? So just as much as we are fighting for maternal mortality and morbidity, it is related to PCOS. It is related to all of these different things, sociocultural and environmental factors that maybe we think about separately, but they all influence one another or impact each other. And so that kind of interconnected advocacy I see is very important. So thank you for being here with us today and sharing about your initiatives and things that you have done. I do want to be mindful of time. It's 7:20, so we'll close out in the next about 10 minutes. And I see that we have a couple of questions in the chat and then one more that I would love for us to finish off with and just closing thoughts in case you all have things that we haven't had a chance to address quite yet. So I will go back to a question that's in the chat that says, does PCOS occur in more Black and brown women because of genetics, lifestyle, and environmental? And maybe this is also an opportunity again to talk about why funding and research is important in addressing PCOS and the impacts it has.
Okay, I'll take that. So, simple answer, yes, all of those things. We spoke about with, the racial component and the implicit biases and how Black and brown persons are not getting the health care that they need to address these conditions. And so there is a genetic component that we do know is connected with PCOS and other conditions. It also is lifestyle, but then that lifestyle is so complicated. Is that a chosen lifestyle or is that a given lifestyle because of your status in life? Yes, it's environmental, food deserts. Do you have places where you can get healthy food? Do you have safe places where you can, walk? Is the air clean? So there are a lot of different factors that play into the prevalence of these conditions in Black and brown communities.
To add to that, because PCOS, there's a hormonal imbalance involved. Something that the Resilient Sisterhood Project has worked with other partners is looking at those environmental justice factors. So not only within the environment, the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, and everything else in between, but also just our product use and going back to lawmaking there, and legislation, regulation, and just that our regulations are not the best. United States regulations are not the best when it comes to products. And that gives way for harmful chemicals to be in our products, to be in our water, to be in our air, that impact our hormonal system and could lead to hormonal imbalances. So while the exact cause of PCOS is unknown, and that goes back to legislation, that goes back to funding, people are connecting the dots with all these different intersectional approaches.
In addition to that, they are actually called endocrine disruptors that we find in almost everything that we use, like dish soap, perfumes, like all the things we use on the daily have been infused with these chemicals that are disrupting our hormones. And depending on our socioeconomic status, we are unable to find the ones that are called clean. So even the fact that we have to do the research of buying daily products that will not cause us harm by itself is a huge disparity in the Black community. So that is also impacting the level of our hormones, because I actually had this experience when I started my infertility journey where I was told to check all the daily products I use and to see if I can change them. I'm like, this is going to cost a lot, right? And some people are aware of it, some are not. But by the time you want to overhaul your entire cleaning product, toothbrush, toothpaste, what you use daily, you must be really rich to be able to do that and avoid all these endocrine disruptors, which is totally, we're unable to do that at this moment.
Yeah, there was a recent study that looked at babies and found that there were a specific endocrine disruptor called BPA. But of course, there are many others. That Black babies compared to other babies had much higher rates of these endocrine disrupting chemicals. And of course, it's the plastics, it's the water we drink. It's, of course, if you live in a certain neighborhood, hello, Flint, what's going on there? If you live in a certain neighborhood, you're more likely to get exposed to certain things that you wouldn't necessarily have to deal with in another neighborhood, right? So it's a really complex thing. And actually for PCOS, there hasn't been much research in the continent of Africa. Actually, we're part of a group that did the first ever prevalent study on PCOS only a few years ago, and it had to be self-funded by the scientist because he couldn't get funding, and this was a world-renowned scientist. So it's about what we prioritize, right? And we know what women aren't prioritized in healthcare, and Black women and brown women are even less so, unless we're the ones driving it. And that's why we're all here. I did want to share something, but we could just move on.
Yes, I think it's the preset settings. I'm so sorry.
No problem.
It's not letting me set you as a co-host, so but it is something you can talk through. It's okay.
Yes, I can. So Dr. Hopkins and I also did another maternal health webinar only a few hours ago. And we did touch on the maternal risk factors, or racial and ethnic risk factors. Black, American, Indian, and Alaska Native women have higher pregnancy-related mortality rates than other racial and ethnic groups. Obstetric embolism, hemorrhage, and these are all connected to PCOS, hypertension. So as we mentioned before, thinking about this before you get pregnant is really important. Just understanding that we just have this inherent risk for these comorbid conditions. Cardiovascular disease, the most common cause of death in women. Hemorrhage postpartum, that's one of the most common cause of death in women, and contributor to maternal mortality. And just some facts about PCOS. It puts you at 3 times higher risk for gestational diabetes, pregnancy-induced hypertension, preeclampsia, miscarriage, twice as likely to have cesarean versus those who don't have PCOS, preterm birth, neonatal ICU admissions, low birth weights, and 3 times higher risk for perinatal mortality. So, and these are just for the general PCOS population. As Black women, and I'm sorry if this is triggering, because it's always triggering to me as I speak about it, just based on the fact that I have been a statistic, right? We talk about these things and we rattle off the statistics. And I'm very sensitive to the fact that you are currently pregnant, Unique, and I was recently pregnant. And it was just something that you realize these aren't just numbers. This is real life. So the one thing I'll say to you, and I'm really glad you found your tribe, don't take anything lightly. Ask all the questions. If they tell you to just take Motrin and Tylenol because you have pain or something, ask the next doctor and continue to ask the next doctor. That's what they told me. And almost 4 weeks postpartum, I was readmitted twice. But almost 4 weeks postpartum, I was I finally went to the ER and got an ultrasound finally after the day after I went home with my baby. I knew something was wrong. I went back the following day. The doctor said, "Oh, well, it's really hard being a new mom." And, kind of, she was trying to be comforting, but it was dismissive to me. And 10 calls later over the next few weeks, calling about bleeding, calling about passing clots, finally going to the ER because I was crawling and wasn't able to even lift my 5-pound baby, who I had to give birth to earlier because of the hypertension. Then finally finding out that I had retained placenta. I was anemic because I was bleeding for so long and required a DNC, emergency DNC and blood transfusion. And had I not said enough is enough, enough with this Tylenol and Motrin business, like I need to just, really advocate for myself, because even though unfortunately my healthcare team were mostly Black, you still fall through the cracks, no matter what your socioeconomic status is, no matter what, as a doctor, and I have MD friends who've dealt with similar things. So just advocate for yourself, have your tribe around you. If you're not being taken seriously, know that you're worth it and you need to be here for your child. And I wish you a safe delivery. I'll be praying about and thinking about you. But we just have to band together and really reach out to me. Reach out to me if you need anything.
Thank you. I will.
Yes.
Thank you all so much. There was one more question in the chat that says, what does it mean when you have regular periods and you just have trouble ovulating? And Dr. Hopkins responded that it depends. Is it a regular menstrual cycle every 21 to 35 days? Is there a regular 3 to 7 day flow? Is the flow heavy, very light? And sometimes our cycles can appear regular, but hormone levels are not, or hormone levels secreted are not at normal levels. So it's important to find a provider knowledgeable in PCOS and especially knowledgeable about the menstrual cycle physiology. You'd be surprised how many providers are rusty or not very knowledgeable. So if there is nothing else that we take from this webinar tonight, again, is continue to advocate for yourself. Keep asking the questions. And if somebody is not answering the questions that you have, find somebody else who can, and keep advocating for yourself and finding somebody who will fight just as much for you as you will fight for yourself. So it is 7:32, y'all. Thank y'all again so much for being here. Being mindful of time. I will ask one question and not all panelists have to respond, but if you have one message that you want to leave with those who have PCOS, or anything that you would have said to your past self as you were going through trying to get your diagnosis, what message would you leave with somebody tonight?
Be strong, you're worth it, and be kind to yourself.
Definitely be kind to yourself. You're more resilient than you know. It's unfair that we have to be so resilient so much and have to fight to be strong. But as Dr. Hopkins said, you're worth it. You can do it. You deserve it.
Thank y'all so much. Again, thank you to our audience for being here tonight. Hopefully you all took away some valuable information. We will post the recording of the webinar on our website, so tune in to birthandcolor.org. And also to keep up with upcoming events, we'll have another webinar on September 30th talking about and addressing awareness for sickle cell disease. So if you are interested in that, please do register on the website and reach out if you are expecting and in need of a doula, or want to connect outside of this webinar. Again, a huge thank you to all of our panelists. I am sending y'all so much love, and I wish I could hug y'all through the screen, hug y'all through the screen for everything that you've shared with us tonight, and holding space for each other also to share your stories. So again, thank y'all so much, and that will close out tonight's webinar.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
so much.